We see a bit of deflection and politicking going on between the states and the federal government. There's now, again, calls for federally run hotel quarantine systems. As we heard from Jane Holton on this program last week, yes, it's part of the solution, but not the whole one. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, as usual in these debates, there's some right on both sides. Now, there is more that can be done to fix hotel quarantine. We can see that just by looking around the country. At the moment, having been burnt a couple of times, the Victorians appear to be in the lead in terms of the best quarantine facilities. But at the end of the day, we're going to be needing quarantine for many months and potentially years into the future. Who knows when the next pandemic is coming? So it does make sense to be now investing in Commonwealth run and funded quarantine facilities in each state and territory so that we're not relying on these hotels that were really never built for this purpose for too much longer.
The Defence Minister made the point yesterday that RAF bases aren't built for that purpose either. So how do you get around that? Because at least in hotels you have, personal bathrooms. In RAF facilities you have shared areas, shared bathrooms, shared eating halls, for example.
Yeah, I don't think the call from Premier McGowan to use the current Commonwealth facilities is very realistic. There's major downsides to all the potential Commonwealth facilities that are available. What we need to do is create new ones. We need to create appropriate accommodation, similar perhaps to the Howard Springs facility, where people are separated with plenty of space, plenty of fresh air in between, but you're still able to ensure security as well as amenity. You're able to protect your staff, your guards and your health staff, and use a facility that's been purpose designed rather than one that's been cobbled together at the last minute like the hotels were. Now, the hotels have been very successful. They were brought in extremely quickly, but a year has gone past and we're probably looking at, in our view, potentially at least another year, and who knows how much longer depending on what happens around the rest of the world. So let's take the effort now. Let's make the effort now, spend the money and build some new facilities that can do this for us and help protect Australians.
Okay, we've effectively eliminated COVID here in Australia, but can that be maintained? For how long?
Well, that's the problem. It can't be maintained forever, and we're hoping that our vaccination program will be our pathway out of this. But we also have to acknowledge that this virus is spreading around the world in incredible ways, and it's continuing to mutate. The situation in India is horrific. The so-called double mutant strain there causing a catastrophic collapse of their health system. And that is a fertile ground for the virus to continue to change and potentially become not susceptible to our vaccines. We don't know that for sure, and therefore we're still going to need quarantine for the foreseeable future.
Okay, we do see some of the research coming through that the vaccines are actually working right around the world. Almost 100% effectiveness at stopping people getting seriously ill from dying. Pfizer is around 90%. AstraZeneca effectiveness there is around 76%. So where do we get to? I mean, I think a lot of Australians, Doctor, are asking themselves, why should I get the vaccine? If we don't have any COVID here, if I get the vaccine, what freedoms does it bring? What cohort of people need to be vaccinated before we start to allow more people to travel overseas, even if it is with quarantine on the way home?
Once we're sure that the vaccines are effective against all strains in terms of preventing serious illness and death, then there is the potential, if Australians are all vaccinated or a very large proportion of us are vaccinated, that we could open up and actually let the virus in deliberately. That's going to be a really tough decision, though, for any government to make, given our past, the last year, and it may well be another year before this decision is needed to be made. But it can only be made if it's safe, and that does involve understanding how these vaccines work against the new strains. But I guess the answer to your question, though, is vaccines are our only option here. There isn't another option. And for now, these vaccines are incredibly effective against the bulk of the COVID in the world. And we're seeing that effect in countries such as Israel, who for the first time in many, many months had no deaths the other day, which hadn't been their situation at all. They are the most vaccinated country in the world, and they're a model, I think, for the rest of the world. But will it absolutely mean our borders are open and we're free and back to normal? I don't think anyone can say that just yet. We're going to have to continue to learn as we make our way through this pandemic.
Just one final question. Are medical experts taking mental health impacts into account when they put 2 million people into lockdown like we saw in Perth?
I certainly hope and expect that the Chief Health Officer and the Premier and the Government of Western Australia have taken all those issues into account when they're making their decisions. I think the mental health impact, though, of a 3-day snap lockdown over a long weekend is perhaps very different to what we saw in Victoria. And arguably, they are preventing a much longer lockdown by going with a short-term response. But it certainly has an impact on everybody, and it has a very large impact on a few people. And I think the government would be the first to acknowledge that. But on the flip side, they have been extremely popular here. We've just seen a massive landslide election victory based largely on their response to the pandemic. And I don't think we're likely to see any change in that in the foreseeable future.
Omar, Khorshid, appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Morning, Laura.